Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here on a what seems like an early morning. We are in Luke chapter 2, and we're going to just get through 7 verses. Luke 2, 1 through 7 doesn't sound like much, but there's a ton of information in here. When we started chapter 1, going to chapter 1, like in verse 5 or something, it connected the announcement of John's birth, John the Baptist's birth to Zechariah, to Herod the Great. So it was connecting John the Baptist to Judean history. Now we're going to have the birth of Jesus, and it's going to connect it to world history. It's pretty clear that that's what's taking place here. So we've talked about John the Baptist, his announcement and his birth, and Judean history. Now we're going to have the fulfillment of the birth of Christ, but it begins with Rome and marches through Syria into Jesus' own location. So chapter 2, verse 1 through 7. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Now, in parentheses, this is Luke clarifying for his reader, Theophilus, or the readers, which census this was. Now, to us, this is like details. It's like just sends us into too much information. But for them, it would be like saying during Trump's time as president, but it's like when in 2016 or 2025. I mean, which two different so he says this was the census that Caesar Augustus issued, which indicates Caesar Augustus didn't just issue a census one time in his reign. Verse 2 says, this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Okay, now the word first is going to be a huge word because it can mean first census, which is accurate, or it could mean the census taken before Quirinius was governor of Syria. So now we're talking about Rome, the Roman Empire, and now we're down into Syria for clarification of which census this was. Verse 3, and everyone went to his own town to register. Now this would be probably lining up with Jewish culture, or you had to go back to your original where your tribe was from. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, and when it says up, that means up because Nazareth is, it's right by, it's above the Megiddo Valley, but it's still lower than as you go across the Megiddo Valley, you start rising and going up to Jerusalem. He's going to Bethlehem, which is only 5 miles south of Jerusalem, but it's still in the high country. I mean, if you look at a topography map, you can see that Nazareth is higher than looking down into the Jezreel Valley, but the height is nothing compared to sea level of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So Joseph, but it also went up. You're going towards Jerusalem. Whenever you go to Jerusalem, no matter what direction you're coming from, you're going up because it's the holy city. So it's probably talking about topography, but it's also a religious connotation. And everyone also went to his hometown. So Joseph also went up from his town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. Now, I'll just say this as we pass by. The way this is written, he's going for the census. Now, in our normal story, they're arriving late at night, and she's probably in labor, and she just rushes in and just gives birth to the child just as they arrive, that very moment. That's possible, but if you read this again, he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. So it gives the impression they arrive and she's expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. So I think it's, it's going to be, it's not months that they're there, but it could be a day, 2 days, it could be a week. I mean, it's more than just rushing in and just delivering a baby, although that could be the case. There's room for them having come, kind of, everybody's crowding around, a lot of things going on. It's like, it's any time now, and sometime during the next few days, she gives birth. Again, we don't know the exact details, but it's not necessarily this rush to Bethlehem and, goes into labor right there. It could be. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, many things here to look at that I want to connect this with. One of the reasons for what Luke is doing here is the timing. Luke is going out of his way to give you a chronological timing so you know when this happened. For us, we may struggle with it, and we do struggle with, was Jesus born in 6 BC? Was he born in 4 BC? Was he born in 0 BC? Because we start dating, from the time of his birth, or 1 BC or something like that. That's how they originally made it. And so this is, I go with 4 BC, but as you look at the information that Luke gives, it could be closer to 6 BC. It's definitely not like 1 BC or 1 AD, because that doesn't work right. But nonetheless, we're in the general ballpark here. A lot of pieces to put together. On page 1, the notes. Gabriel had spoken to Zechariah and to Mary. Gabriel's words to Zechariah had already come to pass. So Gabriel is authentic, in the sense that he told Zechariah what was going to take place. Chapter 1, that took place. Now what he said to Mary is about to take place here. Before Luke records the birth of Mary's child, Luke provides some more information, more details in the narrative, the historical setting, clarification of possibilities concerning Mary's child's identity. The idea that Mary's child is Savior, is Messiah, is Lord, is not detailed here. It's just he's born, and some things. We got the angels, we've got the visits, we've got a lot of things swirling around. But who is this child? Well, that's what the book of Luke and the book of Acts is going to explain. We know this is someone special. The census. We'll spend some time looking at the census today. It's mentioned amazingly 4 times in chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. The census is mentioned 4 times in those verses. Jesus is born 1 time in 1 verse. It's like, so you talk about the census, and then the time came for the child to be born. Now, there's a lot of details about what takes place after he is born, but this seems to be a big deal for Luke because he keeps talking about it and giving us names and historical information. The purpose of the census, again, I'm going to give you more information than you probably want to know, which is normal. But exactly what is taking place in this census, I'll give you this background here as we go through this. Number 1, Herod is pretty accurate that he dies in 4 BC. Herod dies in 4 BC. And so Herod is going to end up having his kingdom divided. He first gives it to his son Archelaus, but that doesn't work out, and then they divide it up into the other divisions. We have a map of, we looked at it already. But Augustus or Octavian, Gaius Octavian is his name, and he became Augustus. We'll look at him, meaning the exalted one, the enlightened one, the emperor. This is almost the name, it deifies the guy named Octavian. Octavian, we'll look at the information here. But Octavian was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar. So he's like, grandnephew. But Julius Caesar adopted him as his son. And he is going to receive Julius Caesar's empire, kingdom. There's going to be a triumphant, 3 guys, Octavian, Mark Antony, and then another individual that are going to rule immediately after Julius Caesar's death. It ends up turning into a civil war. You know this from history class or, some play, Cleopatra or something. And Octavian begins to fight Mark Antony, who sides with Cleopatra of Egypt for support. That ends miserably. And Octavian is the sole remaining leader of the triumvirate. And then the Senate declares him to be Augustus, the emperor, the enlightened one, the exalted one. And he begins a time of, Roma Pax or a Roman peace. He begins to rule with an iron fist, and he between what are the years 27 to 14 AD, 27 BC. Again, I've got it written down here. He rules the Roman world. Caesar Augustus does. And it's a great time of peace. It's the millennial kingdom. So what you've got playing off of each other here is you've got the true emperor, the true Messiah, the true one who's going to bring peace, being born in Bethlehem under the leadership of Augustus, who in the civil world, or civilized world, in the cosmos, he has already established peace and is ruling with an iron fist. Everything is under control. In fact, he is declaring a census of Herod's empire. Now it says it's universal, so that means something's going on throughout the Roman Empire, but particularly he's looking at Herod's empire because if Jesus is born in 4 BC, he's going to be born the very same year Herod dies. If Jesus is born in 5 BC, which is possible, 3 BC, 2 BC, it's not really fitting as far as chronology. If Jesus is born here, he's born just a few months before Herod dies. And Herod is sick. Everyone knows Herod is dying. In fact, his brain, his mind is not functioning well. He's killing sons. He's executing leaders. He's fighting for. His whole world is collapsing emotionally, physically, politically, and he can't hold. I mean, he's dying, and he doesn't know what to do with this. And so it would appear Caesar Augustus of Rome is doing a census of what have we got here. I mean, it's just like taking tallies of, okay, Herod, nice job, Herod. Now you're departing, but what do I have here to clean up? And it's like, who is who, where's what, and what are we going to do with? Because after this, after Herod, Augustus lets Herod's sons rule, but he sends governors, Pilate and other governors, Festus, Felix, to rule the empire for him. So Rome is actually, after Herod, Rome is going to move in and take over Herod's territory. So that's probably what's part. Herod's departure is probably part of what's going on here, and we'll see more of that as we go through. All right. The purpose, point 5, the purpose for the census, listing each person, who is who. Males 14 years and up were listed, females 12 years and up were listed. Property is listed. It's used for the purpose of taxation, which would probably be a denarius per person, or property tax. So we got to wonder, why is Joseph going back? I mean, it's not clear why why can't you just be counted in Nazareth? 1. It's like, why do you got to go to Bethlehem and be counted 1? Why is that? That may be more Jewish than it is Roman. Roman just generally wants to know where everybody's at, but the way the Jews are doing it is we keep track of who's from what tribe, and so we go back to everybody's tribes, and that's the way the Jews. So it may be, well, you can see it goes from Augustus to Quirinius in Syria down to Judea or Israel. And so it may be, Rome says, we want this done. Quirinius, who's over the district, says, okay, Judea, Israel, count your people, and then they go into Jewish mode. It may not be Augustus saying, go to your hometown, because like, why would he care? I want to know who's in Israel. They're maybe going back to their hometown. So something's going on there. At that time, the census could be used to secure an oath to the Roman leadership, as seen in the word translated to register. That is what says to register. And that is the word, you can see the Greek word there, apographa, which means write, write down before, and collect a denarius per person. We haven't got to this yet. Chapter 2, verse 10 and 11 mentions good news, and this will come up later. There's good news in Isaiah's prophecy. The word good news is used. Isaiah's prophecy, Isaiah's vision of the coming of the Lord to bring salvation and establish peace was the good news of Isaiah. The whole end of Isaiah, the second half of Isaiah, chapter 40 through 68, was the coming of the good news. It's the coming of the kingdom. And you can see how that develops when we go through Isaiah. But also the Roman Greek world, the culture of the day used the Greek word good news, and you can see it euangelidzomia, where we get evangelism from, to refer to the deliverance and the imperial cult of the Caesars. It meant the birth of the next emperor. So the good news was about, for example, the kingdom of Rome, the establishment of Roman peace. This is the good news. And where's it going to go? Well, when the emperor had a son, then that son would be the one who's going to inherit the kingdom, inherit the empire, and would continue. So good news. If it's the Messiah, if it's in Isaiah, it's the Messiah. He's going to live forever. When he arrives, it's good news. Now, these two things they're not running parallel with each other. Rome's not looking at Isaiah's text, and Isaiah's not referring to Rome as fulfillment of it, but they're both using the same terminology about two things. We're talking about, if we want to say it this way, Satan's kingdom, the kingdom of this age. We're going to establish peace. So Satan wants peace. Get this, okay? This is off subject, but Satan wants peace. Satan doesn't want, you think, well, Satan wants destruction and chaos. Well, a lot of times that's the result of Satan, because Satan is trying to bring universal peace among mankind to cooperate with him, to worship him, to be part of his kingdom, but he's working with a broken product. You see, I mean, it's like, just imagine forming a company, forming a team. If you've been in any kind of leadership position, say a classroom with children, it's like everything is perfect except, wait, all my lesson plans are good. You guys are doing a very nice job of just sitting there and looking at me and staring, and I'm not sure where your thoughts are, but it's like you're not like causing commotion. You're under control. Thank you so much. But children, for example, once they're no longer entertained, the thing sets in. We could call it the sin nature. They're no longer cooperative. Well, think of running a company or a business, a team, a government. It's like you're not dealing with perfect people. May come across as I'll cooperate, but eventually something is going to set in, if it be a selfish desire or a different opinion, and you're going to have this conflict. Well, people may say, we reject God. We're all atheists. We believe in secular humanism. And so Satan moves in and says, hey, I'll be your leader. And Satan's like, all right, I've got everybody on my team. They've all rejected Jesus Christ. Come with me. And what's he want to do? Come over here. I want to throw you into hell. Well, remember, Satan's not in hell. And Satan's not in charge of hell. Satan is going to be sent to hell, the lake of fire. What Satan wants is to be God. He wants the kingdom of this age. He wants the kingdom on this earth. And so when he brings everyone together, it's like, okay, thank you for coming. Now we're going to set up my kingdom. Well, it doesn't work for him any more than it does for anybody else. He's going to have rebellion. In fact, Jesus says, if Satan casts out Satan, then Satan's kingdom is divided against itself and it cannot stand. I mean, Jesus is not intimidated by Satan's kingdom because he's working with Satan, is trying to organize rebellious spirits who are in rebellion towards God. But the only reason they'd be cooperative with Satan is out of fear or intimidation. The same reason people would cooperate with Satan ultimately is out of fear or intimidation. But otherwise, his own kingdom is divided against itself, from himself down through all the ranks, all the way down through people. So, Caesar Augustus has a kingdom of peace. We can say, if we wish to want to draw a line, Satan's side, God's side, this would be the world. This would be Satan's side, those who love the world. And Augustus right now would be ruling Satan's kingdom. Now, again, he's not in a sense worshiping Satan, but he's definitely worshiping pagan gods who are, in many cases, representations of Satan or Satan's kingdom. He's not following Yahweh. He's not following God. But even if you had people like kings of Judah who were trying to follow Yahweh, say David or Solomon or Hezekiah or Josiah, they're continually tripping up and stumbling and having to repent and come back. And so, in other words, Augustus' kingdom would be an example of world peace established for Satan's part, and it's going well. In other words, Satan wants world peace. He just wants to be the ruler. But whenever Satan starts going that direction, his product begins to fight against itself like a virus, and you're going to have chaos. Thus, the book of Revelation, where you're going to have the beast, but as the beast is the Antichrist trying to rule, but he's got trouble with the king of the south, the king of the north, the kings of the east. It's like, why can't we all just get along? That's what Satan wants. Well, because they've all, God, in a sense, once the product rebelled against him, it has a sin nature. The world cannot function apart from Jesus Christ. And Satan can come and try and unify, but they're always going to backfire and come against him. Now, that's a long discussion here on this, but that is what we're looking at right here. Point 6, the good news. Point B, 6b, the Roman world, whenever the emperor had a son, they would have good news, or euangelios, or euangeliomia, which means the good news. The empire will continue with the emperor's son. We've got peace, we've got control, we're ruling with an iron scepter, everything is fine. But Isaiah talks about the same thing in chapters 40 through 66 about the good news, the euangelion of when the Messiah comes. And so this is a perfect collision in these verses, chapter 2, verse 1 through 7, of the established empire of Satan, the Roman Empire, world peace through the one named Augustus, which means the divine. He's divine, representing and serving for the God, and then born in his kingdom is the true Messiah. And so that good news comes up from both directions. Well, right there, point 7, the world of Emperor Augustus and the world of God's purpose meet here in these verses. More information about the census. Now, we get into the details of this census. Let me read this again, chapter 2, verse 1. It says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that the census should be taken of the entire Roman world. So Caesar Augustus. This is identified. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. I think if you turn your page, oh boy, you got to turn it. So page 4, you've got a map there. And on that map, you've got here. Let me do this so I can put that picture away. I've got this right here. This is a coin right here. This is actually Caesar Augustus right here. This is a coin. You can see the face on one side. You can see the inscription. It actually says Augustus on the other side. That's authentic. That's from this time period. Here's the face. You see right here, Caesar. That's what this is a picture of. That's the backside. See right here, Augustus. Now it's tarnished, or not tarnished, but you see it was a little bit brighter at one time. The patina was a little bit brighter, but I think because Tyler and I have been playing with it, it's kind of worn off a little bit. But that says Caesar. That's Caesar Augustus' face. And on this side right there, there's Augustus. You can see right there, Augustus. And again, that's patina. There's a wreath going around right here. That's an authentic coin of Caesar Augustus. While we're there, here's a coin of Herod. This is an anchor, a ship anchor. And it says a King Herod on there. You can't see it, but the letters are there. And this is the back. What do you call these? A cornucopia, the horns with all the fruit and plenty in it. Those are coins of Herod the Great right there. That's this one. Here comes the Herod the Great coin right there. And these are authentic. These are real, the real deal. We'll leave Augustus up right there. Nonetheless, on this map, here's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. Here's Jerusalem, Bethlehem, 5 miles south of Jerusalem. Up here is the land of Syria. It's a big land. Right here would be Lebanon, right up in here today. But Syria would be there. And Quirinius was the governor or the leader of this area here. Up in Syria, that would be Damascus, and then eventually Antioch, where the church started, and Paul was in Antioch with Barnabas. That was all in Syria. Now, what you have with Quirinius, let's see, where are we at? Page 1. Page 1.8, point 8b, Luke thinks the census is significant. Luke appears to want to use the census as a time marker. Luke mentions the census again when he records the words of Gamaliel defending the apostles in Acts 5, verse 37. So there is going to be, and I'm going to show you this, and there's some discussion. If you just read through this, you stumble through it. But there appears to be 2 census that were taken. There appears to be this first one that we're talking about, but then around 6 AD, there was a second census. When Gamaliel is defending the apostles, and that's the verse written on page 1, Acts 5, verse 37, Luke mentions this census. Gamaliel, which is Paul's teacher, is appearing before the Sanhedrin, and they're wanting, early in the book of Acts, they're wanting to stop these apostles from preaching Christ. The Sanhedrin and the priesthood killed Jesus, and they think it's over. He's dead. These guys will just fade away. And the Sanhedrin, the Romans, the Jewish leadership have seen it before. A rebel rises up. You shoot him from a tree on a golf course, and his party just fades away. They just disappear. And these guys just keep coming back. And Gamaliel stands up to him and says, "Listen, guys, if you keep podcasting and putting up blogs and covering these people in the news, you're just adding fuel to the fire. If you just do what we see all the time, just let it go. Their leader's dead. It will burn out. It will be just like," and here it is, "after him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census and led a band of people in revolt." So he says there was this guy who came up as a leader, and he died, and his group faded away. And then he says, in the year of the census, Judas the Galilean, look at that, notice right there, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census. So there's a guy named Judas. While Jesus is growing up in Galilee, right here, there's a man named Judas. Jesus is about 10 years old. There's a man rose up in Galilee named Judas who led a revolt when the census was being taken. And that's documented, 6 AD. And then he was killed, and it just faded away, and nothing happened. So Jesus now, the same thing. Now, this says right here, in your text, in the days of Caesar Augustus, issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Now, that happens often, it wasn't unusual. So Luke clarifies it in verse 2. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. It was the first census. So we know Josephus records this event, talks about it. He talks about Judas. He talks about this census. This is referred to by Luke when he quotes Gamaliel. This census is referred to by Josephus. This was the census. But there was a census apparently, because this would be too late. This can't be the census, because Jesus would have been, crucified at the age of, if he was born in 6 AD and was crucified, let's say 30 AD, he'd been crucified at the age of 24. Want to go 33 AD, would have been crucified at 27. So this just doesn't work. So when in Luke is saying right here, and the translation is the first census, or it could be the before census. It was the census taken before Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, if you look on that map I showed you on page 4, I've got and we'll talk about it again, I've got all the sons of in the gray boxes of Herod who were ruling. But up there in Syria, Syria was ruled by Quirinius from 6 to 9, for sure, 6 to 9 AD. So Quirinius, when he came into power in 6 AD, had a census of Judea, and that's when Judas revolted. And that would make sense. The governor of Syria, who's been appointed by Rome, comes down and says, I want to know where everybody's at, and we all need a denarius or whatever's taken place. In other words, if nothing more, it's just showing authority over Judea or over Israel. It'd be northern Israel and Judea, Galilee and Judea. And Judas, probably sentiment of the people, we're not putting up with it, and led a revolt against the Romans. They killed him, and everybody got it back in place. So this would take place in 6 AD. But it was the first census. It was this would be the second census. There was a first census or a before. So this is not it. This is not the one. It's the one before this. And now that leads us to a whole discussion of who Quirinius was. And we'll probably, while we're here on page 4, go back to page 3 so we see the verse. There's the English Standard of chapter 2, verse 2. This was the first census when, now right there, this is the first census. Notice in the English Standard, there's a footnote A, I left it in there, which is before. So The English Standard says it was the first registration. Now see, they changed the word from census to registration because that's what it means. We're registering, which would possibly include a vow. We swear allegiance to Rome, we'll cooperate, and here's our denarius or whatever. But it also can be, this was the first registration before Quirinius was governor of Syria. So we know Quirinius was governor of Syria from 6 to 9 AD. Okay, point 1. I'll read this just to you. The best known and documented administration of Syria by Quirinius lasted from 6 to 9 AD. During that time occurred the Great Enrollment, the valuation of property in Palestine mentioned in Acts 5:37 by Gamaliel and also recorded by Josephus. So, this is, I don't want to say absolute, but it's absolute. As far as you can, you've got Josephus talking about it, you got Luke referring to it, you got Gamaliel mentioning it, and you've got the book of Luke beginning that this was a census before this one in 6 AD. These registrations or taxation incidences mentioned by Luke in Acts and in Josephus are a second registration that is not the one mentioned in Luke 2. Turn the page. There was found near Rome in Tibur in 1764 AD, so a fragment of marble with part of an inscription which is now preserved in the Lateran Museum of Christian Antiquities, with the inscription recording the career and honors of a Roman official who lived in the reign of Augustus, and he governed Asia as a proconsul, and he twice governed Syria. So this is talking about a governor who was in Syria 2 times during the reign of Augustus, as Legus divine does. The name on the inscription has perished, yet there is indications of sufficiency to show that with practical certainty that the officer who achieved this splendid career was Publius Sulpicius Quirinius. His government of Syria AD was 6 to 9, was therefore his second tenure. Now here is a block right here. Here's an inscription. This inscription on page 4 is called the Latina Selecte. It names Quirinius as Duumvir, which is Latin for 2 men, referring to a joint magistrate from Rome. So they're ruling. That's one inscription. Turn the page. Page 5, there's another inscription. That's the one we're referring to, from a tombstone discovered near Rome. That's the one we just read about. And it mentions the career that he had. He was the governor or legate of Syria 2 different times. And then there's a third one connected to it, the tombstone of this individual who conducted a census for legate Quirinius. So this is the tombstone of the guy who oversaw the census of Quirinius, who is mentioned on this inscription as a governor of Syria 2 different times, and this is describing one of the times that he was the governor. So you've got 1, 2, 3 inscriptions of Quirinius, who is the governor of Syria, and that would place him, like we got on that block right there, as a governor from definitely 6 to 9 BC, but also from 11 to about 7 BC? Is that what it is? 11 to 7 BC? I think it can also be, I think it's 11 to 7 BC. So Quirinius was governor here. So when this takes place, Luke is saying this was the first census Quirinius had. This one right here is what Gamaliel refers to as the census from Syria in 6 to 9 AD. So that places that's kind of when that all takes place. So nonetheless, if that for a lot of people that becomes a stumbling block of when is these things all taking place. But that narrows us down to Jesus being born sometime. This is AD. This is BC. He had to be born before 6 AD. And he had to be born 7 BC or after. So in other words, 6 BC and he had to be born when Herod was king. Herod dies in 4 BC. So this is really the mathematical, linguistic, archaeological inscription support. This has to be when Jesus was born. And I go with 4 BC, but it could be as early as 6 BC. And it matches exactly with what history shows. So this verse, at different times, people have used it to attack the scriptures as it makes no sense. but the fact it's naming people that are inscriptions, and that when you break it apart, it all overlays as he was a ruler during the time of Augustus. Nonetheless, let's end on page 4. Let's go back to, I'm looking here at my notes to make sure we got everything. Let's go back to page 2, point 9 on page 2. The focus begins, and I said this before, begins broad to a microscopic zoom in on the minute details. It starts with Augustus, who governed the whole world. Then it moves to Quirinius, who is under Augustus in Syria, overseeing events in Israel as Herod was dying. And then it zooms in on Joseph, who is in Nazareth going to Bethlehem, and then born in Bethlehem is this babe, this child, Jesus. So it goes all the way from the Caesar Augustus to the governor to a traveler to a baby. Chapter 2, verse 1, in those days the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This phrase, as you see on point 1, in these days, I don't want to make too big of a deal about it. Some commentators do, but it's worth, I just want to at least mention it to you. When we read that, in these days, it just seems like, once upon a time. It's like where we're going to, not a fairy tale, but it's like we start our story at that time in history. But the problem with, or the challenging part, or the background is that phrase, in these days, or in the days of those, and I've got the Greek underlined there in the box, is used several times, but it comes right out of the Old Testament, thus as like Amos talks about, and in those days, and it starts about spiritual things taking place. It's an eschatological setup. In those days, this is going to happen. So we can talk about, in those days, these are the things that are going to happen in those days. But we're back here in our day. But in those days, then these things of the Messiah, the end times are going to begin to take place. But meanwhile, we're in our days. Well, this begins by saying, in those days. It's like, it begins right here in chapter 2, verse 1. We are in the eschatological days. In those days. So, you don't want to overplay it. But at the same time, Luke begins using Old Testament terminology, talking about, in those days it'll be like this. So Luke picks up by saying, well, in these days, here we are. We're in the days of the Messiah. And indeed, if it's right or if it's wrong, it's right, because we are in the days of Messiah in these verses. Now, here's some other places I've got it written down for Luke. Compare it to Luke chapter 4, verse 2. For 40 days being tempted by the devil, and he ate nothing during those days. It is exactly the same phrasing. During those days is in the days of those. So the tempting of Jesus would tie into those eschatological days, where Satan confronts the Son of God on the earth as the Son of Man and offers him the kingdom. You can take my kingdom if you'll just bow down to it. So we've got end time things happening. Luke chapter 5, verse 35. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. So Jesus is with his people, but the day is coming where he'll be taken away, and then in those days, again, eschatological, and we would be in those days. We're in those days where the bridegroom is taken and we're waiting for him to return. Luke 9:36 on top of page 3. And when the voice had spoken, this is the transfiguration, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. So in those days, they had the transfiguration. The disciples just kind of kept to themselves until later on in the time. And then Acts chapter 2, verse 18. Here, this is, did I say Micah? It was Joel. What did I say this came from? What do you remember what I said? Amos. I said Amos? Okay, it's Joel. I made a mistake. Acts chapter 2, verse 18, and you know this. This is where they're quoting right out of Joel, Peter. Even on my male servants and female servants in those days, I will pour out my spirit and they shall prophesy. And then you can see I've got the Greek there for you, so you can just compare it. It's the same phrase all the way along there. So this idea of in those days, when he begins in those days, is almost like he's setting up eschatological events. And we've got, as we looked at, Augustus, which going back to Zechariah's song and Mary's song, comparing the proud, the arrogant, the rulers, the rich, with the humble, the poor, the oppressed. You've got Caesar Augustus and his world, and you've got over here being born, in a manger, the Son of God, and this represents the poor, the weak, and that there's going to become a reversal of fates, where this cosmos is not going to last, where this is a seed that's just going to keep on growing until it becomes an eternal kingdom. There's some more information about Augustus right there on point 3. We said most of that. Chapter 2, verse 2, this was the first registration when Quirinius was governor. And I think we've talked about enough of that. As we go by the map one more time on page 4, if you will notice the dotted line right there, going along from Nazareth in Galilee, going across the Jordan River, coming down the side, then crossing right at Jericho, going up to Bethlehem. That would be, unless they go straight down through Samaria, which was probably unlikely. Samaria would be hostile to the Jews. The Samaritans had their own religion. They had their own temple. They had their own Old Testament. They took their own Old Testament and converted it into the Samaritan Old Testament. Because remember, the Samaritans are the Jews that were left behind at the Babylonian captivity. When the Babylonians took the Jews captive, they lived together in Babylon, married, had families, and then they returned to Judea. And then you've got the book of, help me out, Ezra, and who built the wall? Nehemiah. We've covered all that. Those are the people. And even in those days, when they returned, who'd they have trouble with? The Samaritans right to the north kept trying to interfere with them and lie about them. Who were those Samaritans? Those were the Jews that were not taken captive, but the Assyrians before had moved, because the Samaritans were the northern kingdom of Israel. They had taken Samaritans or Israelites, the Assyrians, in 722 BC. Before the Babylonians came in 586 BC. The northern tribes of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, which was called Samaria, those people were taken and dispersed. They were sent all over the Assyrian Empire. And there's pockets of them around, but they were not preserved together as a country, a nation, like they were during the Babylonian captivity. Well, just like those northern tribes of Samaria, this would be, Ahab's nation and Jezebel's nation when they all fell. They were dispersed. They also brought Gentiles in and planted them in Samaria. So now, your part of your Jewish neighborhood is moved away. You'll never see them again. And then coming in on the next bus is a bunch of immigrants or deportees coming in from other countries who speak different languages are moving into these houses. Well, that's shocking for a week or a month or a year, but pretty soon your kids go to school together, you start having barbecues together, you start learning their holidays, they start learning your holidays, and you kind of blend your cultures together. Your kids marry, and you say, well, we're Jewish. Right, we're Jewish, but we're also whatever country they came from, and so they're no longer the tribes of David. They've intermarried with the world, and so the Samaritans were not pure Jews. They had not kept the line clean. Plus, they not just genetically, but ideology. They brought in the gods, the practices of the pagans. Now again, be careful. We are not making a comparison to America and immigrants. Okay, that's another whole topic. We want a nation with borders. We want other nations to have borders and their cultures, but America is not in the same. We are not like God's chosen people, and we do not want to be infiltrated by the foreign ideologies. In fact, sometimes our culture could use a little boost from some of the foreign ideologies right now, as far as work ethic or family values, because we're not like the city on the hill necessarily that we'd like to be. So we're not talking about the same thing. I support nationalism in America. I support borders, laws, and rules. But if someone wants to come from another country and join us, you're not defiling the pure genetic line of Americans, because what is that? I mean, American is a Declaration of Independence. It's an idea more than it is a race of people. So this is a different conversation. But anyway, the Samaritans, they're part Jewish, part other nation. So it was a problem in 445 BC. It was a problem In the 200s, they built their own temple. They had their own wars. Herod killed a bunch of them because they wouldn't cooperate. Well, even in Jesus' ministry, remember, he went early in the book of John, he's in Jerusalem, and he goes up through, he takes his disciples up through Samaria on the way back to Galilee. And it's you don't understand how radical. It's like, what are we doing? Well, we're going to go through Samaria. No, we're not going through. And then he ends up at a well talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well. It's like, and the disciples are in the back going like, okay, did you sign up for this? I didn't see this in the paperwork. It's like, we're in Samaria and we're talking to a woman in the middle of the day at a well, a public, it's like, I ain't going to say anything to her. And well, he'd sent the disciples in to get food, to go into the shops in the city, and they came back with food, but they didn't talk to anybody. They just got what they needed and came back. We sent it for lunch. I sent you to get people, not food. And you come back with sandwiches? And so he sends the woman in and she brings the whole crowd out. So, I mean, that was radical for him to do that. And then at another time, they're on the northern side, coming from Galilee down through Samaria. And the Samaritans met him because by that time he's got an entourage following. Jesus got an entourage following him. And he comes down. And the Samaritans meet him at the border up by Galilee, coming out of Galilee, say, you got to go around. And that's where James and John, they figured out who Jesus is and who they are, and that they're the power of God. It says, Lord, we see what's going on here. Do you want us to call fire out of heaven and consume these losers? And it's like, he's like, so do you even know what kind of spirit you are? He said, no, let's just walk around. And Jesus went around Samaria at that time. So he was not afraid to walk through Samaria, but he also not afraid to walk around Samaria. So there's a lot of going on here. Nonetheless, Mary and Joseph were in Nazareth, and they would have came down. Probably, it doesn't tell us. It doesn't say they did not go through Samaria. But common sense would say they didn't go through Samaria. But they probably went over here on the opposite side of the Jordan and then crossed at Jericho and went into Bethlehem. It was about 90 miles to be a 3-day journey at best. Ask Mary how long it took. Maybe 5 days, but 3 days, maybe 5-day journey to get to Bethlehem. Okay, so that's what's taking place there. Again, I love those inscriptions on page 4 or 5 because that's verifying Quirinius existed. I mean, and he talks about him having 2 different reigns or times of rulership in Syria. Chapter 2, verse 3, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. Registered to each town was, again, I asked these questions. Was this a contemporary practice in the East? Did they all go to their own towns? I'm on page 6.1. 1b, was this to accommodate the Jewish concerns to ancestral heritage? I'm going to go with B. Why did they all go to their own towns? Did everybody go to their own towns? Does everybody have an ancestral town throughout the Roman world? Possibly this may have been a Roman decree implemented by Quirinius in Syria over the land of Israel. And when they do it in Israel, well, how do they do it in Israel? Well, when they take a census or register in Israel, they all go to their ancestral town. So it may have been a Jewish way of accommodating the Roman request that came through Quirinius. This could have involved property tax. Okay, chapter 2, verse 4. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. See, that's loaded with information. He came from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, and the city of David here, the city of David is Bethlehem, because David was born in Bethlehem. David came from Bethlehem, and that's where the family would go to report back. Point 1, that just tells you it was a 90-mile trip. The phrase, his own town, chapter 2, verse 4, is clarified in chapter 2, verse 5 as house of David, meaning his ancestral town, line of David, meaning the place of origin. So again, that would be his ancestral, that's where he comes from. It's possible his family owns property there. Going up indicated, okay, we talked about that going up naturally. Prophecy is being fulfilled. It's Gabriel had said this would take place. Zechariah confirmed it in his song. Joseph had been introduced as the house of David in chapter 1, verse 27. Old Testament prophecies, right here. Now, Tony, we talked about this yesterday or the day before about Solomon. And again, let me see if I can do this quickly. I got other things I want to do today. David, Solomon. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It's nowhere in our thinking because we know Jesus is the son of David. And we know Jesus is in the line. We're going to see the genealogy here in a little bit. Jesus comes from the line of David, all the way, just keep tracking all the way down. But when these prophecies were given to David by the prophet Nathan, and even, you could put in there, Samuel would have said some things, and especially coming later with Jeremiah and Isaiah. Remember, Isaiah and Jeremiah, Micah, Joel, those prophets don't exist yet. They haven't said anything yet. You just got the prophets up through, Samuel, Nathan. You got writings of Moses. You've got some things in Genesis. But now listen to this. David has a son named Solomon, or even before Solomon is born, David is told this. Now, forget the New Testament. Forget Jeremiah and Isaiah. You don't know anything about the New Testament. You don't know anything about Jeremiah, Isaiah, Micah, Joel. And listen to these words. This is what Nathan the prophet says. Because David wants to build the temple. Right here. He wants to build the temple. And Nathan says, good, go do it. And then he has a dream, and he comes back to David and says, God told me, you're not the one to build it. Your son's going to build it. Well, who built the temple? Solomon built the temple. We know this. So David's not going to build it. Solomon's going to build it. When your days are fulfilled, Nathan says to David, and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you. And that's a key phrase, possibly, raise up. Who shall come from your body? He'll be raised up. Have your own body, same your own flesh, and will establish his kingdom. He will establish his kingdom. So now David is thinking about, he'll raise up Solomon, who's from David's body, and he'll have his own kingdom. And I will establish his kingdom, and he shall build a house for my name. He will build the house, not you. All right, the temple. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Cool. I mean, forever is a long time. And that's eternity. And I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. So this son right here is clearly, could be referred to as the Son of God. He's going to build a temple. It's going to be a kingdom that's going to last forever. And in David's mind, and even in Old Testament historical text, who is this guy? Solomon. There we did it. Prophecy fulfilled. In those days, it's end times, Solomon's on the throne. It's over. It's like, and then now Solomon, he's got to live his life, and he begins to rule and reign. Who is he? I am the one that was raised up from David's flesh to build the house for the kingdom that will live forever. I will be a son to God, and I'll be known as God's son. Does it make sense? It makes total sense. But don't you think someone else is going to come and die on a cross and be dead for 3 days and be resurrected? It's like, what? What are you talking about? Don't you think maybe there's going to be others? It's like, what? What about the church? What about the Antichrist? What about, it's like, we're done here. This is a fulfillment of what was spoken to Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, spoken by Moses. They built the temple. This is it. It's going to go on forever. And now you're Solomon, and we go back to the same problem Satan has with people, a sin nature. And now Solomon, who is not the Messiah, he's a normal man with a sin nature. He rules, prospers, and then it's like, well, and he ends up getting a bunch of wives from other countries. They want temples for their gods. It's like, why not? So he ends up building temples for the foreign gods, for his foreign wives. And the whole thing, he starts, well, we need more money. We're in the kingdom of God. And so where do we get the money? We got to raise taxes. So taxes get higher and higher. He ends up taking his nation, the kingdom of Israel, right here, as Solomon's approaching his death. He's in debt. The nation is in debt. And that's why they send caravans out trying to make more money and bring in money and trade, because Solomon's losing control. And you know this because his son, Rehoboam, comes up and wants to be king. And the people say, no more. can you alleviate the taxes? They're an oppressed people under the rulership of King Solomon, who's become a tyrant. And they say, can you, if you're going to reign, can you at least lower the taxes? So Rehoboam, as you know, goes to the wise men of Solomon. They go, yeah, your dad he beat the people up. I mean, it's like, if you were lower the taxes, these people will be your people forever. Rehoboam goes to his guys he went to college with, says, what do you guys think? He goes, oh, don't wimp out on them. You tell them, my dad whipped you with cords, I'll whip you with scorpions. He said, you show them you're the man. They're looking for a leadership. He goes, okay, I like that. He came out and tells the people, my dad whipped you. He says, my dad whipped you with whips. I mean, he had the people working under slave labor because he needed stuff built. He needed projects. They'd come in and serve time as slaves and go back. That's how Solomon ended his reign. And Rehoboam says, and I'm going to whip you with scorpions. If you thought my dad was bad, you're going to beg for the days my dad's back in control. And the people go, listen, we've read the Constitution. We know what human rights are. We're done here. And they rebelled against him. He goes, stop. And he goes, who's going to stop us? And he goes, what do I do now? And then Jeroboam steps up and says, hey guys, I'll take care of this. And Jeroboam, who's one of the workers, the foremen that built the temple for David or Solomon, says, listen, follow me. And he led the 10 tribes against, the way. And that's how Israel came about. The northern 10 tribes went with Jeroboam. The northern 2 tribes stayed with. But in other words, you can see how Solomon thought he was the fulfillment of all these prophecies. Raised up, offspring from your body, establish a kingdom, build a house, establish your kingdom forever. God will be his father, he'll be his son. And in a sense that was true, but it wasn't the fulfillment. The fulfillment has to now come to take place in Jesus, who is the same, going to be the same thing. And these are the prophecies that are being fulfilled. Gabriel's prophecy, Zechariah, and then this Old Testament prophecy, and many others. Micah, chapter 5 of Micah, this is the big verse. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you will come forth for me one who is to be ruler of Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. In other words, there's going to be a ruler, but he's going to be from the ancient days. In other words, he's going to be born, but he's going to be from before time began, which is speaking of the one Solomon thought he was, but was a foreshadow of. So point 6, Joseph's journey is in response to Caesar Augustus' decree, but Caesar Augustus' decree is in response to God's plan and purpose to be registered with Mary, who was legally pledged, who was with child, and that while they were there, there came time to give birth. And then here we go. And she gave birth to a firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. Right there, the word for swaddling clothes is, you can see right there, sparganu, which means to swaddle, to wrap in swaddling clothes. This is a verb form of the noun, which is sparganon, which means a swaddling band or strips of cloth. And what they would do is they would take, to keep the baby's arms straight and without being all like curled up and deformed, to keep it straight. Again, this is me paraphrasing, but they take straps of cloth and wrap it so the baby was wrapped in, so that it would stay straight, a little piece of cloth. And that is what's called swaddling clothes, but it means strips of cloth. And then it says manger. You can see the word right there. It's fatne, it's in the box, meaning a feeding trough. The verb is passo, meaning to sprinkle or to strew. So it's the place where they would strew the grain. Instead of throwing it in the grass, like for the chickens, you'd throw it in this box, this manger. And I've got a picture of 2 mangers right there, or mangers. Those are from Megiddo. That's from the stables in Megiddo where the horses, Solomon had horses. And those are actual, and they find them all over, but those are pictures of actual mangers. And the last word right there, in, is kataluma. It means a lodging place or a guest room. It denotes a guest room or a temporary place of rest for travelers. Its meaning varies slightly depending on the context, I'll show you, but not a hotel or motel. This is not a place that has an innkeeper that comes and collects money at the door and there's room and there's no place. The hotel is full. That's not what it means. It means one of 2 things. It means one. It means a house, and the house would be two-story house. This is, rough right here. This is where they lived. The family lived on the floor above. Below right here were the animals. And so you'd go upstairs, up a ladder, upstairs, and this is where you lived. You kept your animals down below. There's your manger, your feeding trough right there. There was no room here and it means guest room, where the family lived, but there could be a place over here where we have for guests. They got there and the place is full. They can't get in, so they had to stay down below in the lower level, top level, lower level, and they had to stay apparently where the animals were, and that's where they would have stayed. The other idea is that you would come to a city, and there would be a building, this is a top view right here. There'd be a big building for travelers, and there'd be like an open space like right out in here, and there'd be like little rooms. This would be the closest thing to a hotel, or maybe just corners, maybe not even rooms. Just like you could stay here or here, and there'd be like the fireplace right here for the whole group, and you'd travel by, you could go into this public building and stay. There's no innkeeper, there's no one really taking care of it necessarily, but it's a place, there's no room for them in this room, this building, so that means they would have had to stay outside the travelers, and it's not a hotel, it's like a truck stop. And this is 2 or 3 or 4 miles, Bethlehem, off the main road. So this is probably rare. There's not a hotel or motel. Now, there's a different word used for inn in the story of the Good Samaritan. When the Samaritan finds the guy that was beat up and takes him and binds up his wounds and takes him to the innkeeper and pays for his room and says, I'll pay whatever I need to pay when I come back. That was more like our hotel or a motel with an innkeeper. This is not the same word. So it is not anything like where the innkeeper is at in the story of the parable. So this is it's one of these two. It's probably this one. It could be this one, but it is not a hotel. Now, we'll pick this up next week. We got to quit. We'll pick up the guest. My gosh, I can't believe. I thought, man, this is going to be ridiculous. Only cover 7 verses today. But if you look right here, and I've got some pictures online. I've got pictures I'm going to show you today, but I'm not. This is what we have in Bethlehem, is this right here. First of all, everything in history gets covered up. It breaks down. Like this would have been, if this was a building, this would have eventually wore down. And this would have been possibly there could have been like a land like this. You see right here? This was a cave, like an entrance right in here, a cave going into here. And then on top here, they would have built up on top of here a house. It'd be like a split level. So you could walk in. This would have dirt on the backside, but you could access it here into this cave and then go upstairs where the house was, a perfect place. Because right here is what would be a cave, if you want to call it a split level house. That is what is in Bethlehem is today. Then as the years go by, real quickly, in Bethlehem, Hadrian comes in 135, destroys Jerusalem, and builds temples, pagan temples, for example, over the place where the Christians honored the burial and resurrection of Jesus. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre today. He built a pagan shrine, buried it, it's gone. Anything that was religious or something that he called Jerusalem Aelia Capilia. It's like he renamed it after his own family. Covered up all the shrines, put up pagan shrines. It's now Roman. We're now fully Roman. But still, Christians were still living among them. Jews were still living. And we know exactly where these things are, but they're buried. Well, here in Bethlehem, he came over this place that is now today the Church of the Nativity. Hadrian in 135 goes to Bethlehem and builds a pagan shrine over what is called today the Church of the Nativity. Why? Because the Christian says this is where Jesus was born. He goes, nope, we're done with that, and builds a pagan shrine over it and puts his little god up here on top and an altar right there. It's gone. Well, when Constantine comes by, 325, 326 BC, AD, he comes over, his mom, Helena, came over and sent a group, and they says, where was Jesus crucified and buried? and they point to the temple to Venus, and they go and they uncovered it, and they found what is the remains of the burial bench and all these things, and that becomes Church Holy Sepulchre. They came here and they said, this is the place. So they tear this temple down, and they find the cave, and they build over it a floor and a building, which is a 326 AD church. And you can see right here, and you can see it right here in this picture. I'll show it to you. I'll have to start next week doing this. But right here on this picture of the tile, you can see that church, the tile of that floor. You can still see it. Okay, here we go. There's Bethlehem. That's the fields of Bethlehem. That's Jerusalem from Bethlehem. There's the fields, there's Tony, there's the building. I got to talk about this building more. That's part of the building remain. There's the pillars Crusaders put up inside there. And right there, see that floor right there? I'm pointing at it. See how it's covered right now. Now that floor has been built over by the Crusaders in 1100. But what they did, they exposed this and put doors right here so you can see down here and see see right there, the mosaic of 326. This is the Crusader floor. And so you see how these cover up right there? So you can still see Helena's floor covering up the cave. And they keep going through there. There's some things. There's some more pillars. All right, and right there, that is, you go down to the bottom of the cave, and down here, they've still got a marble floor over the top of this right here. It's a marble floor. See this? But if you reach your hand in there, you can touch the pavement, the bed, the stone, right? Just like at the Holy Sepulchre, there's a place where you can reach in and touch the stone of Calvary. They've got it all covered up with, holy places, but you reach in there and touch it right there. So this is where Jesus was born. All right. You do what you want to with that information. I'll pray and we're done. Father, do thank you for the chance to look into these things. We thank you for the history that's recorded in Scripture. We thank you that these things were prophesied from the days of the Old Testament, that they're being fulfilled in the days of Luke during the time of Christ, and it still continues today that Jesus Christ is Lord and King in eternity past, has come into our age to save us, and is going to return again to establish His kingdom. We ask that we would be faithful as we wait for His return, serve Him as He's called us to, and continue to proclaim the good news that Jesus Christ is Lord and our Savior. We thank you for this opportunity to live at this time. Please empower us with your Spirit in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for your patience. I also have a 6-minute video.
Here we're in the streets of Bethlehem walking
Anybody needs water, cold. Here $1, one. Need water, $1.
Through the streets of Bethlehem, the year 2012.
This brother, handmade from Bethlehem. You want to buy? You want to look for me?
There's the hills outside of Bethlehem. The fields of the shepherds would be out somewhere like that. Now we're standing in front of the Church of the Nativity. This was built by Constantine in 326 and then by Emperor Justinian around 430 or 530 was finalized. That's the front of the church. There's a door frame there that you can see with the arch.
40 people.
Again, there's been many years of rubble built up over this. The hills of the shepherds, fields of Bethlehem, outside the city.
Oh yeah,
that's me taking a picture while Tony videotapes in front of the church. Again, this was built in 326, but covered up in 135. This whole site was covered up by a pagan shrine by Hadrian in 135 AD, and then when the Roman Empire became Christian, they asked the Christians of Bethlehem where was Jesus born, and they identified this location as a cave below in the back. And there's an arch. You see the arch right there. And then that was blocked shut, so horses couldn't go in and plunder the church. And instead, this small little door, so everybody's ducking to go into the church. You have to duck to go in as a protective measure to keep the church from being plundered. This again was built in 326. The Persians came by to destroy it, but they spared it in 600, in 614. They spared the city or the church because inside on the walls were pictures of Persians, the wise men that dressed like the Persians. Now I'm inside. I just stepped inside the foyer there, checking this little room out here off the side.
Sometimes you don't want to follow him because you don't know if he's going in the right place. What's in there? Well, don't leave me.
Now we're inside the church. You can see the pillars. Those were put up by the Crusaders in 1100 AD. And there's 2 rows on both sides. You see the ceiling, if you get a chance to see the ceiling. Oh, notice the floor, how the floor is opened up. The floor we're standing on was a floor put in by the Crusaders. There's the inside there. See the rafters up there? That would be the work of Constantine and Justinian in 326 and 520 or 530. The Crusaders came by in 1100 and put these pillars up and a new floor. They covered up the Constantine's floor from 326. You see those panels on the floor there. Those doors open up and you can see the details of the mosaics from 326. See how it's built up. You see, this would be in front of the house that Jesus was born in. If it was a house, a 2-story house. There's the mosaics. 326 little stone mosaics in great detail that Constantine put in, and then the Crusaders covered it up. And then in recent excavations, they built a frame around it so that you could open those wooden panels up and look down at the 326 AD floor while you're walking on the Crusader floor or a later floor. Now this would be one of the altars in the church. We're still in front of where the house would have been. The lower level, which would include a cave, is further back, and then we'll have to go down to it in just a moment. This would be a Latin service going on, or a Greek Orthodox service going on. There you go. There's the priest doing the service in front of one of the altars. Again, this is the church built in front of the cave that goes down, which would be the lower level where the animals were.
So the church was built over the cave.
We're going out to the cave of the Nativity, where traditionally Jesus was born.
Yes. So back to that time, people keep their animals. I mean,
Very dark, very
Here we are, we're standing ready to go down to the lowest level, which would be, again, there's been a lot of rubble buildup, so again, this would be a cave, probably the first level of a house, 4 BC. And down there is the marble floor that covers up the original stone or the original ground level. Family would have lived up on the second level. And this has been identified as the location since 135. Here it is. Here's the little altar over the marble floor, and you can put your hand inside that hole where that star is at, that silver star, and touch the actual floor of the original location. This was identified in 135 and covered up by Hadrian, and then re-identified by Christian memory by Constantine in 325, 326, and this was then built.